The sound of the tornado frightened his neighbors, but it affected Bob differently. That sound reminded him of helicopters in Vietnam. His hands started trembling, then suddenly stopped, because Bob understood. This tornado wasn't war, but it was time for leadership. Welcome to Vietnam Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the greatest heroes hide in the most ordinary places. In the middle of Kansas, among the cornfields in the small town of Ellsworth in Wilson County, lived Robert Bob Coleman. He was 73 years old. His gray hair was always hidden under a John Deere cap, and his hands bore the marks of 50 years of farming life. His brown eyes were calm, his speech was sparse, his smile was rare. Ellsworth had a population of 847 people. Everyone knew everyone. Secrets didn't last long. Gossip circulated between the coffee shop and the church. Bob lived outside this cycle. He was polite but distant with his neighbors. He was there when help was needed but never stood out. Humble, quiet, reliable. That Sunday morning, Bob had woken up at 5 as always. While drinking his coffee, he watched outside from the farm window. The sky was strange. The clouds coming from the west weren't normal. Dark, heavy, rotating. He listened to the weather forecasts on the radio. Severe storm warning, possible tornado. Bob had seen plenty of these. If you live in Kansas, weather is always a factor. Tornadoes, thunderstorms, blizzards, they all come and go. Life continues. He thought this morning would be the same. But he was wrong. At noon, the wind began to intensify. Bob was in the barn with his horse Buster. The old quarter horse was getting restless. His ears were pricked. Animals sense storms before humans do. Bob knew this. "Easy there, buddy," Bob said, stroking the horse's neck. "Just a little wind." But then the sound of the wind changed. A high-pitched whistling began. Bob's hands froze. This sound was familiar. Very familiar. Vietnam, 1969. The rotor sound of Huey helicopters. The deep rumble of Chinooks passing over the jungle. Those sounds he listened for carefully during his A-Team's night operations in the My Linh rural area. Bob's breathing quickened. His heart rate increased. PTSD symptoms were returning after years. But then he stopped. He took a deep breath. This wasn't Vietnam. This was Kansas. And he was no longer Sergeant First Class Robert Coleman. He was just Bob, Farmer Bob. But the tornado's sound continued to change. At 2 o'clock, the town alarm siren began to sound. This was a serious warning. Bob left the barn and looked west. On the horizon, close enough to see with the naked eye, a giant tornado was forming. The hurricane category was still unclear, but it was definitely large. Bob immediately took action. He locked Buster in the barn, moved the tractor to a safe place, moved household items to protected areas. But he was also making other plans in his head. Green Beret training never left. Crisis preparation, rescue operations, leadership protocols. Everything was clearly standing in his mind. At 3 o'clock, his neighbor, Martha Henderson, came from her house. The elderly woman was panicking. "Bob, they said on the radio that the tornado is heading straight for Ellsworth. What am I going to do?" Bob remained calm. "Martha, go to your basement. Take water and a flashlight. Don't go outside. I'll come check on you in 2 hours." "But what about the others? The Johnson farm, the Miller family?" Bob hesitated. This wasn't his responsibility. He was just a farmer. But then the helicopter sound came again, the increasing intensity of the wind, and Bob understood. At 4 o'clock, the tornado hit Ellsworth. The sound was terrible. The wind was blowing at 120 miles per hour. Roofs were flying. Trees were being uprooted. Cars were being thrown around. Bob was in his own basement listening to the radio. There was confusion on emergency frequencies. Rescue teams were too far away. Roads were closed. The tornado lasted 45 minutes. Then it suddenly stopped. That terrible silence came. Post-tornado silence. When Bob came out of the basement, the scene he saw was a battlefield. Half the houses were damaged. The shops on Main Street had collapsed. Power poles had fallen. Telephone cables were dragging on the ground. And people. People were calling for help. Bob paused for a second. There were two voices in his head. The first, "This isn't your problem. Go back to your farm, mind your own business." The second, "Soldiers never leave soldiers behind." The second voice won. Bob ran to his farm. He took out a box from the basement. He hadn't opened that box for 30 years. Inside were his old military equipment: flashlights, first aid kit, walkie-talkie, map compass, and a Green Beret cap. Bob didn't put on the cap. It wasn't time yet. But he took the equipment and returned to town. His first stop was the Miller family. The house was seriously damaged, but no one was injured. Bob checked on them, showed them safe places, moved on to the next step. The situation at the Johnson farm was bad. Old man Johnson was trapped under the barn. His leg was broken. He was in shock. Bob's Green Beret medical training kicked in. He applied first aid, made a splint, got Johnson into a safe position. "Bob," Johnson said in pain, "how do you know these things?" "I saw it on television," Bob said. He was lying, but it wasn't the right time to explain. At 6 o'clock, the town center was completely devastated. The fire station had collapsed, the police station was damaged, the city hall had lost its roof. And worst of all, communication was cut off. There was no contact with the outside world. Bob stood in the middle of the main street. He looked around. Panicked people, wounded, missing children, collapsed buildings, chaos. Then he heard a voice, a familiar voice. Bob Coleman!" Sheriff Deputy Mike Torres was running toward him. The young man in his 30s was normally in authority, but now he was panicking. "Bob, thank God you're safe. The radio isn't working. There's no phone. The roads are closed. Rescue teams are at least 6 hours away. I can't manage this alone." Bob looked at Mike. The young man was well-intentioned but inexperienced. He had no crisis management training, and Bob did. "Mike," Bob said in a calm voice, "how many people were injured?" "I don't know. At least 20, maybe more. The medical center's roof collapsed. Dr. Patterson is injured." "Is there water?" "Water pipes burst. No electricity." "Communication?" "Nothing works." Bob nodded. Situation assessment was complete. Now it was time for an action plan. "Mike, listen to me. Stop panicking. Take a deep breath. Now we're going to apply a systematic approach." Mike was surprised. "Bob, how do you know?" "I'll explain later. Now listen to me. What's the primary objective?" "What do you mean?" "Is it rescuing the wounded, finding missing persons, or organizing shelter? Determine your priority." Mike hesitated. Bob continued. "Mike, you're the sector commander. I'm your advisor. Now tell me, what's the most critical situation?" Mike thought. "The wounded and the missing Miller children." "Good. Now let's make a plan." Bob took out his old walkie-talkie from his pocket. Mike's eyes widened. "Where did this come from?" "Emergency preparedness," Bob said. "Do you know the emergency services frequency?" "Yes, but..." "No but. Radio discipline. Clear, concise, professional. I'll set the frequency, you give the message." For the next 2 hours, Bob quietly organized. He converted the community center into a medical station for the wounded. Mrs. Peterson had a nursing background. He appointed her head nurse. He made the high school gym an evacuation center. He used the church for water distribution. And most importantly, he organized a search and rescue team. Everyone was looking at Bob. How did this humble farmer know such professional organization? "Bob," Mike said, "who are you really?" Bob hesitated. The war in his head continued. Secrets versus service. But he looked around. The hope, trust in people's eyes. They needed him. They needed his leadership. "I'll explain during the operation," Bob said. "Now go find those kids." Bob went out to search alone. He made contact with base on the walkie-talkie. The Miller children, Tommy, 8, and Sarah, 6, had left their house during the tornado. The last place they were seen was by the creek. Bob went to the creek. His jungle tracking skills from Vietnam kicked in. Footprints, broken branches, disturbed ground. He followed the trail. An hour later, he found them. They had hidden in an old storm drain. Tommy's arm was broken, Sarah was in shock, but they were alive. "Hey, kids," Bob said in a calm voice. "I'm here to take you home." "Mr. Bob," Tommy said, "we were scared." "I know, son, but you're safe now." Bob carried the children safely. He applied first aid, reassured them, notified base. Professional, calm, efficient. When he returned to base, a crowd was waiting for him. News had spread. Bob's rescue of the children, his organization skills, his leadership. Sheriff Deputy Mike came to his side. "Bob, it's time for an explanation. Who are you?" Bob looked around. The whole town was there. The wounded, the rescued, volunteers. They were all looking at him. He took a deep breath. "My name is Robert Coleman," he said. "United States Army, retired, Green Beret Special Forces, A-Team 3rd Group, Vietnam veteran." The crowd remained silent. "I served in Vietnam from 1967 to 1971. Special operations behind enemy lines, search and rescue, civil affairs, unconventional warfare." Mike's mouth fell open. "Green Beret? De oppresso liber," Bob said. "To free the oppressed. That's our motto, and today you're the oppressed. The tornado is your enemy. I'm just doing my job." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Bob, why did you never mention this?" "Because war is over," Bob said. "I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm a farmer, but today you needed a soldier. So I became one again." Tommy Miller, with his patched arm, ran to Bob. "Mr. Bob, are you a real hero?" Bob knelt down, came to the child's level. "No, son, heroes don't wear uniforms. Heroes are people who help when help is needed. Today everyone here is a hero." For the next 3 days, Bob became the unofficial emergency coordinator. He organized the town until rescue teams arrived. Medical triage, food distribution, temporary shelter, communication. Everything was done with military precision. When rescue teams arrived, the FEMA coordinator was surprised. "Sir, who organized this? This is professional emergency management." Deputy Mike pointed to Bob. "Our local farmer. Turns out he's Green Beret." The FEMA coordinator met Bob. "Sergeant Coleman?" "Farmer Bob," Bob said. "Sergeant is in the past." "Sir, with respect, your tornado response was textbook perfect. You saved lives here." Bob nodded. It was a team effort. A week later, life began to return to normal. Temporary housing, insurance claims, rebuild efforts. Bob returned to his farm, came back to his routine, but he was no longer that quiet farmer. The townspeople looked at him differently, respect, gratitude, but more importantly, acceptance. Bob was no longer carrying a secret. A month later, a town council meeting was held. Mayor Anderson stood up. "We want to officially appoint Bob Coleman as emergency coordinator on a volunteer basis." Bob hesitated. "I'm just a farmer." "No," Sheriff Mike said. "You're our protector. Always have been. Now we know it too." Bob accepted. That evening at his farm, he was sitting on his porch. The cornfields were swaying in the breeze. Peaceful. Quiet, but a different kind of quiet. No longer a hiding quiet, a content quiet. Mrs. Peterson visited him. "Bob, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "What did you experience in Vietnam? Why did you never talk about it?" Bob didn't answer for a long time. "Martha, war changes people. Some of us learn to carry it quietly. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It just becomes different. So now, how do you feel?" Bob smiled. For the first time in a long time, a genuine smile. "At peace," he said. "For the first time in 50 years. Because Bob understood, being a hero isn't measured by medals but by service. Being a Green Beret isn't past glory, it's present responsibility. And sometimes the greatest missions are carried out in the smallest communities. Kansas farms may look peaceful, but underneath, warriors can be waiting to serve again, waiting to lead again, waiting to protect again. Bob Coleman was a farmer, but he was also a Green Beret, and both were different aspects of the same man. The tornado had changed everything. But actually, it had just revealed Bob had never changed. He had always been a rescuer. Now everyone just knew it. Because real warriors never retire. They just find new missions. And Bob's mission was crystal clear. Protect Ellsworth, Kansas, just like he protected his A-team in Vietnam. Different war, same soldier, same heart. So do you have such quiet protectors around you too? People who appear normal but have extraordinary pasts. Share their stories in the comments because every quiet hero deserves to be recognized. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. On the Vietnam Stories channel, we'll continue sharing such powerful stories with you. Because sometimes the greatest heroes hide in the most ordinary places.